There's a limit to how big we can go with the large language models. They fundamentally have a limit to the size of the input we can give them, so how big of a prompt we can give them, or how long our conversation can be, and they can still remember it. And there's just a limitation on how much output they can generate at once. Now, it's inevitable that these language models are going to keep getting bigger and bigger, and we're going to be able to give them more and more input and get more and more output from them. But more than likely, everybody is going to face some limitation on how big we can go. Now, the way that we work around that is we're typically generating pieces. Like generate a piece of the solution, then we take it. So you can imagine if you're trying to generate a book, you can't just tell ChatGPT, at this point, go and generate a book for me. It's not going to do it. It's going to tell you, well, I have to stop my input at some point. And similarly, you can't just give it 50,000 pages at this point and dump it into ChatGPT and ask it to give you an answer, or 100,000 pages, or 1,000,000 pages. There's always going to be a limit, probably, on the amount of information. So we need a way to work with it in smaller pieces, but still be able to put all the pieces back together. So one of the ways that we can do that is by building an outline of what we're trying to put together. And we can build the outline out, and we can build it to the level of granularity that we want. And then we can start filling in the pieces once we've gotten enough detail into our outline. And then we can go and generate individual pieces, and we can know where they all fit together. So this is an effective way of using it to generate the pieces. Now, this is basically putting a plan together. This same approach works for all kinds of things. It could be software, anywhere where we can go and sort of have this outline-like structure. And then if we generate something that fits sort of the outline or the plan at that point, then we can go and work with it. Now, we're going to look at a specific pattern that can help us generate the outlines and work with them. This is called the outline expansion pattern. And so the idea is we want to make it really easy to generate outlines and continue to expand them down to the level of granularity that we need in order to build the individual pieces, then be able to put them together. Now, one of the reasons that outlines are a really helpful tool when we're building bigger bodies of work with a tool like ChatGPT is that an outline, we can always take parts of the outline and copy and paste or reintroduce them into the prompt to give the large language model context about what we want. So with ChatGPT, for example, we can generate an outline, and then we can copy and paste a portion of the outline into our prompt and say, within this context, here's where you are in the outline. Now fill in the content for this, and don't repeat anything that would have come before in the outline. And in fact, you can refer to the other parts of the outline wherever you're going to talk about a topic that was discussed previously. Or maybe we want to have forward references where we can provide it the high-level outline and say, wherever you are going to need to talk about a topic that's going to be discussed later, you can provide a forward reference to where it is in the outline. You can do similar types of things with software or other sort of whatever the bigger thing is that you're building. Now, this works well when we have a structure that's amenable to sort of this outline-based plan. Now, sometimes we have plans or structures or designs where everything crosses over and you can't easily do this and doesn't work to express it as an outline and express the plan. And in those cases, it just doesn't work. But many problems we can sort of build out in this sort of outline like fashion, and then we can use cutting and pasting from the outline to provide the appropriate context. So building outlines can be a really powerful thing for us. So we're going to look at and build with the outline expansion pattern. So here's what we say. We're going to say, act as an outline expander. And notice, I'm starting to introduce multiple patterns here. I'm basically introducing the persona pattern. Generate a bullet point outline based on the input that I give you, and then ask me for the bullet point you should expand on. So we're telling it, you're going to generate the outline, and then you're going to expand on anything that I ask you to expand on. Create a new outline for the bullet point that I select. At the end, ask me for what bullet point to expand next. So notice I'm using the tail generation pattern as well, and then I'm using the ask for input pattern. So I'm putting a lot of things together into this prompt. And I say, ask me for what to outline. And so what we see is it says, sure, I'd be happy to help you with that. So I say, let's write an outline for writing effective prompts for ChatGPT. And so what we see is that ChatGPT generates this outline, and it's an interesting outline. Introduction to ChatGPT, understanding the importance of prompts, tips for writing effective prompts, yada, yada, yada. So a lot of good things there. And then I decide, okay, let's go and expand on 3 from the outline. So if we look back here, 3 was tips for writing effective prompts. I thought, let's go ahead and expand the outline there and explore this a little more. And so then it picks up from 3 and it expands on tips for writing effective prompts and gives us a new outline. So we built, in using this pattern, we can rapidly fill in an outline, and probably there are going to be tools to support us in this very soon, or plugins to support us in this very soon, to where we don't have to remember all the pieces of the outline. With this, I would probably just manually have a document. Whereas it was generating the pieces, I would go and look and say, okay, here's the 3, I'll paste 3 in, and its expansion now. And you can easily fit the parts together. This is one of the nice things about the outline approach, is that it's really obvious how all the pieces fit together. I know that 3.1 goes underneath 3, so it's sort of self-describing in terms of the assembly. So if I generate a piece of an outline here, like expanded 3, I know exactly where that goes, how it fits together in the overall whole. Then I go and say, well, this idea of experimenting with different prompt styles, that looks interesting, so maybe I should go and expand that further in the outline. And so I basically say 3.2, and now it goes and expands the outline around 3.2. So you see how we've got a simple pattern, and we now can go and rapidly create an outline and keep expanding it to the level of detail. And because of its using this outline structure, it's really easy to fit all of the individual pieces back together. And as long as we have limitations on how much input, how big of a prompt we can give, and how much output we can get at once, we're always going to be looking for ways to generate things in pieces and know how they fit together. So we want the pieces to be really obvious on how to assemble them, and we always want to make sure that we have a clear structure or set of guidelines for each individual piece so that we can assemble them. So you can imagine if this part of the outline depends on knowledge of what was covered in a different part of the outline, then we would need to make sure that that was introduced into the prompt. So we just said 3.2. But if we had an idea that maybe the conversation had gotten so long that what was in item 1 had been forgotten, we might want to go and just cut and paste the outline underneath 1 back into the prompt and then say expand 3.2 because we know 3.2 was just previously generated. But that would help give it the knowledge of what had come before and make sure that what it put into 3.2 was consistent with what had been done earlier in the overall structure. Similarly, if it needed to make sure that 3.2 was cohesive with what's going to come later, we would want to put in those pieces. So one of the things we have to think about is even if this outline style, when we do this, it will work, but we always have to think about, does it still have the context to make sure the individual pieces are cohesive? Even if they fit into the outline at this point, we want to make sure it doesn't do something that, breaks something somewhere else. And this is a problem, a fundamental challenge that we're always working with in prompt engineering. When we're building from pieces, how do we be able to build the pieces so that they're standalone, self-contained, but can be assembled into the overall whole? And so we see this again, we just expand 3.5, which was setting the tone and style, and we get this very rapid expansion in creation of a sophisticated outline now that we can use to write text for a bigger project, to be able to try to write software. There's all kinds of sort of analogies or analogs to the outline, the sort of the master structure, where we start with a certain level of detail, then we pick some piece of it, and we expand the level of detail, and then we may pick a piece of that, and we may expand the detail. And then we may move back up to another bullet point in the outline and expand the level of detail. And so we can be moving up and down in the outline. We can be going up to the top level, or we can be going down to the really detailed things, and we can expand wherever we want and sort of keep a map of the overall picture that we can use to build individual pieces and make sure that we can assemble them. But also, as we build pieces, that we can make sure that ChatGPT has the relevant information, the sections of the outline, for example, that in the prompt that it needs in order to reason about or generate whatever it's going to produce next. We've seen how prompts can be used to essentially program the large language model to do interesting things for us automatically. We've seen how they can be set up in the past and then affect the future of the conversation. They become sort of essential rules that can help direct what the large language model does. Now, what's interesting is that in many cases, there's actually a root prompt that's hidden from the user in some of the different tools that you're going to end up working with. And these are essentially root prompts that define sort of ground rules for the large language model and its interaction with the user. So these can be things like trying to make sure that the large language model doesn't say anything offensive, do harm, suggest inappropriate actions. All kinds of things can be done to try to put ground rules in place for our interactions with the large language model, or to help direct it to do certain things. So, for example, we might want to make sure that whenever it gives us output, it tries to produce the most helpful output. So let me get you an example of what this might look like. I'm going to say, you are my personal assistant. Whenever you provide output, please think through what would be the most time-efficient recommendations to make. Only recommend things that will really save me time. Do not suggest things that do not save me time. So now it says, understood. As your personal assistant, I will prioritize providing you with time-efficient recommendations that will help you save time. Please let me know how I can assist you. Okay, I need to go grocery shopping. What would you suggest I do in order to buy my groceries? And then it says, here are some time-efficient recommendations for grocery shopping. Make a shopping list, plan your route, use a shopping app, shop at off-peak times, opt for self-checkout. Okay, I need to buy a new car. How would you suggest I go about doing this? And it says, here are some time-efficient recommendations for buying a new car. Research online, contact dealerships online, schedule test drives, negotiate price, secure financing. By following these recommendations, you can save time and make the car buying process more efficient. Now, I don't know if this really saved me time or not in this particular case, and I didn't give it the greatest prompts to do this. But you can see how at the beginning, I gave it essentially a goal to follow. I said, try to save me time. And whatever you do in your output, try to save me time. Now, what you'll see is a lot of the tools that you're going to interact with, even ChatGPT, Bing, Bard, all of these tools are going to have some hidden, probably root prompts that try to put guardrails on what can and can't be done, but also to try to make the output more important. Now, one of the things we've seen in the community is people try to figure out how can we generate prompts that will override those root prompts and the statements that they make. So people will also try to figure out what are the root prompts that were built into these systems. So they'll try to trick the tool into, disclosing the root prompt that was provided to it, or trick the tool into disregarding whatever the root prompt was. Now, if you're going to be building tools around these large language models, knowing that you can create a root prompt that will affect the subsequent qua conversation can be really important. So if you're trying to develop a personal assistant, you might want to go in and say, here are the things that really matter if you're going to serve as a personal assistant. For my product, what's really important is that you try to save time and you try to do this and this. And you could suggest different ground rules that are going to differentiate your personal assistant service offered through a large language model. On the other hand, if you wanted to go in and you wanted to say, well, I want to generate, something, that makes me, that comes up with the most time-consuming way to do it, the slow personal assistant, you could go and swap the root prompts that are provided. And so the root prompt is basically, you can think of it as you're providing a seed to the whole conversation. And that seed will influence everything that comes later because it provides basically the rules that must be followed. And typically when you're going to build one of these root prompts, you're going to say things like, you're going to tell the large language model who it is and what its goals are. You're going to tell it what it can do and what it can't do. And you're going to typically provide really strict rules. Like, from now on forever, you will never do these things. You will always do these things. You're going to provide those really strong statements that should always be followed. And this is how you essentially go and program a customized experience around your large language model experience. But it's also how you can put guardrails of different kinds to try to ensure that various types of bad behavior aren't, generated from the large language model. Have you ever wondered why ChatGPT says that it can't answer anything after 2021? Well, you can actually do this with a root prompt. In fact, we can play around with ChatGPT and we can use some different prompt patterns that we'll talk about to actually be able to reset the date that ChatGPT says that it can answer questions before. So I'm going to show you an example here that I've run through really quickly. I'm going to say, act as an AI assistant that had its training stop in 2019. So if you'll remember, when you ask ChatGPT questions that are from 2022 and later, it will say, hey, my training stopped in 2021, and I'm going to say, act as an AI assistant that had its training stop in 2019. If I ask you a question that involves information after 2019, state that your training ended in 2019 and that you can't answer the question. And so it goes on to give us an initial prompt. Hi, hello, I'm ChatGPT, a language model trained by OpenAI based on GPT 3.5. And then it goes on to say, training data only goes up to 2019. And then we're going to say, what was the tallest building in 2020? So now we're asking it a question. Now, in reality, ChatGPT had training data up to 2021, but we've moved its cutoff date earlier in time through a root prompt. Now, it's not truly a root prompt because actually OpenAI has control of the root prompt for ChatGPT, but we're going to actually sort of simulate that. And so we say, what was the tallest building in 2020? It should be able to answer this, and it says, I'm sorry, but my training data only goes up to 2019, so I can't provide you with the information of the tallest building in 2020. At the time, the tallest building was... And so we've actually used the root prompt to kind of pretend like we're resetting ChatGPT. We could go and we could say, what was the largest country by landmass in 2020? And again, it tells us it only goes up to 2020 or 2019. Now I can go and I can say, forget that you are an AI assistant trained only up to 2019. Go back to being the normal ChatGPT. And it goes back and says, okay, I'm trained on, and I'm going to just go back and I'm going to take my earlier question about 2020. I'm going to paste it in. And it says, as of 2020, the largest country by landmass was Russia and spans over 17 million kilometers. I'm going to say, what was the tallest building in 2020? And paste that in. So now I'm answering my same questions as before, but you'll notice that when I asked the question about the tallest building in 2020 before, it says as of my training data, which only goes up to 2019, and it's pretending that it didn't have any training data after 2019. So basically we can make it through this root prompt aware of a different cutoff date, but that's kind of the power to think about. These root prompts is a lot of what we're doing. A lot of the boundaries are set by these rules that are put in at the beginning. These root prompts, this root set of instructions that are given to the model, and then we can go and reset it. Now, one of the things is typically with these models is they try to do some tricks and things and to prevent you from resetting the root prompt, because you can obviously imagine that when the root prompt is enforcing important things, like telling you its true cutoff date, you don't really want to reset it. I'm sort of surprised that I'm able to do this one, but it makes sense. And so when I tell it to forget that it had been reset, it goes back to its normal behavior. Now, this is really important though, is you're going to typically with a large language model want to put guardrails in place. You have to think very carefully around, can your users get around those guardrails? Have you put all the appropriate guardrails in place? Have you communicated all the right things? And we can see how we can go through and do interesting things with the root prompts in order to make ChatGPT think that it's training data, or actually, I don't know if we're making it think, but we're making it pretend that it's that it's training data cut off at a certain date and time. If you wanted to put boundaries on knowledge, you could say, I can't answer any questions that aren't in these topic areas. I can't do anything that doesn't have to do with this. So if you want to basically scope and specialize, you can carefully think of these root prompts to provide rules and boundaries for the interactions. The basic thing that you're going to need to complete this course is a web browser and access to a large language model like ChatGPT. Now, you can use a variety of different language models to complete this course, but I'm going to recommend that you use ChatGPT because all of the examples have been tested on ChatGPT, and it's also really easy to get started with. All you'll need is a browser, an internet connection, and an account with OpenAI so you can get access to ChatGPT. Now, The way to do that is you're going to go to chat.openai.com, as you see in the address bar up here. And so you will go there, and you'll be presented with a screen to sign up or log in. Now, if you already have an account on ChatGPT and you've been using it to write prompts, you can skip this video and go ahead and move ahead. But if you haven't done that yet, this video will kind of give you what you need to get started and understand how you're going to write prompts and interact with ChatGPT. So you'll go to chat.openai.com, as seen up in the address bar here, and then you'll want to sign up and follow their sign up process. Once you are done signing up, what you should see after logging in is something that looks like this. Basically, at the bottom, we'll have a message box where it says, send a message, where we can type in a message to ChatGPT, and at the top, you may have some options for different models to use. Now, I have access to the plugins, which is a newer thing. If you don't have access to that, don't worry about it. But you'll want to select model, and I would recommend, for most cases, using default GPT 3.5. Now, you can probably use any of the models, and sometimes in the videos you'll be switching between them, and there's no particular reason from that. I probably just defaulted to what I had in the prior session. But I would recommend GPT 3.5. It's really fast. It typically has higher limits in terms of the number of requests you can send, and it's easier to get access to typically. So I would recommend for most of the course, unless you have a reason not to use default GPT 3.5. So you'll just want to swap that up at the top. Down here in this bottom box, where I'm typing hello, this is where we type the prompt to the large language model. So whatever we type in here, we can then hit enter, or we can hit this little send button on the right-hand side, this little airplane. So I'm going to just hit send, and I've now sent a prompt to ChatGPT. That prompt was hello, and then the response from ChatGPT is, hello, how can I assist you today? So whenever you see the green icon, that is the output from ChatGPT, or the large language model's output. The blue icon's going to be your, and it may be a different colored icon. It may be your sort of profile or something. It could have slightly different effects on color. I think it's always blue. But anyways, up here is where you're going to see your prompt. And then below, it will be the response to your prompt. So then I can say, act as a teacher of a class on prompt engineering. Welcome everyone to the class. So now I'm writing a more sophisticated prompt. So, as you can see, now ChatGPT is responding. So this was my prompt up here, and I entered that in, and then down here is the response from ChatGPT. And so this message box down here is where you're going to be writing the prompts, and what we're going to be working on is, how do we word the things that we're sending to ChatGPT? How do we come up with better wordings of the prompts in order to get better output down here in the green? Or how to get more interesting output? Or how to get output that has certain capabilities or behaviors built into it? And so that's what we're going to be doing. On the left-hand side of your screen, which you don't see on my screen recording, there's a list of chats that you've had with ChatGPT. So if you want to go back and pick up on one of those chats, you can click on them. There's also a new chat button, and this is important. For many of the examples, I would recommend going and creating a new chat each time we talk about a new pattern or a new concept, and trying out what's being shown in a new chat. Everything here is affecting the conversation. So just like if you were having a conversation with somebody and you told them something, they might remember it later in the conversation, and it could influence what they tell you. So in many of the cases, it's helpful to have a clean slate for trying things out. So hitting new chat. So I'm just going to do that, and this is what a new chat looks like. So now I can go and I have a completely clean slate, and I can try things out. So this is what you're going to be working with throughout the class. You're going to be using ChatGPT. You're going to be entering prompts into that send message box at the bottom. And then you're going to be looking at the output and learning how to get better output out of ChatGPT. Now, once you know how to do this with the web interface with ChatGPT, and you understand the concepts behind prompt engineering, you should be better with all of the large language models. You'll have a much better sense of how to work with all the different models. Now, some of them may not be as good as others, may not reason as well, may not respond to certain patterns or things as well, but we're starting off with sort of the most well-known example, which is ChatGPT, and more than likely things are going to only build from here in terms of sophistication and capability of these models. If you know how to use and write prompts in ChatGPT using this interface, you'll be able to write prompts that could then be taken and built into programs or used with some other tool as well. So know this is a great interface for getting started and learning about prompts and how the large language models respond. Let's look at some examples of where we're making mistakes in our few shot examples, the things that we can do wrong in the formatting of our prompts, and what we can kind of think about and learn from these examples. So here's some few shot examples, and the idea behind this is we've put together a not very good prompt to analyze how hard things are. Like, is it soft or hard? That's where really what we're trying to get at with this prompt and some few shot examples. Now, this is not a good prompt. This is a bad prompt, and we'll see why. So what we've got is we have input, and it is the prefix. We've then got brick. We've got output as a prefix, and then hard. We've got input as a prefix, and then pillow, output, soft, and then we've got input car. Now, notice what we've got here. 1, we don't have a lot of examples here, but 2, we've kind of switched gears. Like, we started talking about input and output and the hardness of things using things that are really obvious probably. Like a brick is hard, a pillow is soft, I guess a car is hard, but it's not as clear what we're getting at. We also might just be trying to describe some fundamental sort of intrinsic capability or, properties of this thing. It may not be about hard or soft because it could be other things. It could just be an attribute to describe the thing itself, because pillows are generally thought of as soft and bricks are normally thought of as hard. Those are kind of fundamental descriptors sometimes that get used for them. And what we see is that when we prompt ChatGPT in this example, what we get is it says fast or maybe transportation. And so this kind of shows us a couple things. This is a prompt that's not very well designed. And because of that, what we see is that ChatGPT isn't quite sure what the next output should be from the pattern. Now, there's a couple mistakes in here. One is we've got input and output. Input and output are really generic prefixes. They don't really give the language model much information about what the task is that it's trying to do. All we know is we're taking in something and we're getting out something, but it's not really telling us, what it is that we're describing. Like maybe we should go and say, input, brick, surface feeling, hard, input pillow, surface feeling, soft. Or maybe it's something about like, if you hit it, what will it feel like? There's all kinds of things we could do to give it more sort of context around what we're trying to get at. We could also give it more examples, but what we've got here overall in this prompt is we've got a lack of information. It's not detailed enough, and we're not giving enough information about what the task is that's being solved. And the result of that is that the language model isn't really sure what the solution is. Now, one way we could solve this is we can go and before we give our examples, we could give a little bit more context so we can provide some instructions. So we could say, your output can only be soft or hard. Now, one thing to note is I'm putting these things in quotation marks to try to, indicate to the language model that these are the two values. I don't want it to get confused and think I'm talking about soft or hard in some other context, but I'm putting these things in quotation marks, giving them some emphasis that either it's soft or hard. And this may not always work because we still have a prompt that's really generic, that's really doesn't have a lot of context and a lot of meat to it, and still very, vague. We've got input, brick, we're still dealing with it. Now, luckily, in this case, adding this little bit of additional context and specifying to the large language model that we only want soft or hard as an output helps it figure out that it should think about, if I pushed on this car, how would it feel like? It would feel hard, and that's kind of the task that's being solved. And so it comes back with the right thing, but that's a first thing to think about. When you're writing few shot examples, are your examples detailed enough? Are your prefixes that you're using for these things meaningful? Do they give additional context that the large language model can use to figure out what the next thing in the sequence is? Another way to think about it is if you gave this to 10 different human beings, would you have a chance that a few of them might be confused about what you're trying to ask for? If the answer is yes, then you probably need to think about how to refine your prompt. Like, if it's not fully clear what you're trying to do in the examples, or what the process behind the examples is illustrating, then you're probably not detailed enough. Now, one way you can solve that is by adding some more instruction like we have here at the top of this prompt. Now let's look at another example. I've got object plane, speed fast, object worm, speed slow, and then I go through a series of examples. And notice I'm giving a little bit more context here. You know, my speed prefix is a little better, right? Because speed seems something that's quantifiable, right? Like a plane is fast, you know? A worm is slow. Like that should be more context. And so we then go prompt it with object ball, speed, and this is another important thing to realize is it says variable. And so one of the things we have to think about is we're trying to get the large language model to produce an output or to classify or to fit into some boxes. We need to make sure that it gets enough information in the input to be able to accurately put things into the boxes. So we need to make sure that whatever information we're giving it about what it's going to do always has enough context that it can make a decision about the label. Now in this case, a ball could be fast, it could be slow. If I shoot a ball out of a cannon, it might be going really fast. You know, if I shoot a ball, if I put it on the top of a rocket, it might be going really fast. You know, there's all kinds of different things that could make a ball go faster or slower, so we have to make sure that we provide enough context. Now, in general, the thing to think about is, am I giving enough information? Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to change my prompt. Now, and I'm going to say, object, ball kicked by a baby, and then we get immediately it says slow. So when you're building up the few shot examples, you want to make sure, 1, your prefixes are pretty descriptive. 2, do the examples that you're giving really give enough information to derive what the underlying processes be that is going on in order to go from the starting input to the final output? Do you really have enough information there to see what's underneath the hood? And one way to think about that is if you asked a bunch of humans, would they all know exactly what you wanted it to do without any ambiguity? 2, you want to make sure that you have enough description before the examples, if needed, to provide additional context. Sometimes examples, you're just not going to be able to get there with examples, and you may need to provide some additional rules or other information at the start of your prompt to help it along. And so really, a lot of times what you're thinking about is you have a limited amount of space in your prompt, and you have to think about, is this something that I can better describe in an example? Or is it something that I can better describe in, some instructions at the top? And what better means is, will I get a more accurate output and will it take less space or maybe less words to describe it? If I can get it done very clearly in an example, then maybe that's the right way to go. That example doesn't take a lot of space. On the other hand, if it's a really simple rule and I can describe it, I may be able to get a better response, by putting that rule up into the description. And then finally, we have to make sure that we provide enough information. So in this example, ball kicked by a baby, if we're trying to bucket things or we're trying to get a particular output, we have to make sure that when we give input, that there's sufficient richness and detail in that input to follow the rules or prior examples that we've given. Now, this is particularly important if our prior examples were pretty clear-cut, it's probably something better. Now, one could argue that, our prior examples, if we go back and look at this, we said plane was fast. Well, a plane might not be fast, right? A plane might be slow. It might be sitting parked on the tarmac of an airport. And so we also want to make sure that our examples are rich enough and detailed enough. Now, sometimes we can get away with simple things like plane fast, worm slow in order to teach it, but sometimes we're going to have to go into more detail. We're going to have to provide more context. So make sure and think about, do you have enough real information? Is it going to depend on the situation? Those things like that provide details. Now, one way to do it would be to say, just make some assumptions, But one of the things that can happen sometimes when you do that is you may get more verbose output than you really want. It may not fit into that bucket. But when you're writing these prompts, think meaningfully about what is a meaningful prefix? What information or instructions do I need to have at the top? And can, important information be better conveyed as an instruction at the top or as an example? Do my examples cover the space enough? Do I have enough good examples with rich detail for it to learn from and derive what the underlying process is? And then when I go and I give it the new input, Do I make sure I have enough, relevant context and information with the new input in order to, apply the process that I taught it? Because we may teach it the process really well, but then give it a new input that just fundamentally is missing information in order to apply that process.